So let's talk more about this. Leanne Maskell has ADHD, is a coach for others with the condition. Very good morning to you,
Morning.
Leanne. Also, pharmacist and lawyer Thoran Govind is joining us as well. Very good morning to both of you. Leanne, we were hearing from Alice there and the real concern she has. She's taking exams. She felt there was a shortage of medicine. She didn't know she was going to get the right medicine. It's a really difficult position for people to be in.
Yeah, it's terrible, and it's really life-threatening as well. I think the fact that the medication can often actually save people's lives isn't talked about. There's a 5 times higher risk of suicide for people with ADHD than without. So the fact that this medication has just been stopped overnight with no real communication to the people that it's affecting has just been really awful to live in.
Now, you coach others, don't you? Give us some examples of how people have been affected by the shortage.
Really terribly, a huge range. So it goes from people that have developed other coping strategies like drinking a lot of alcohol or smoking to cope, and then with self-harming and actual suicidal ideation, people that have experienced real challenges with their jobs and at risk of losing their jobs. And then also I've heard about children in school that are kind of refusing to go to school and their parents are actually being fined for them refusing to go to school.
What happens when you've been regularly on medication and then all of a sudden it stops? What kind of changes? How quickly do you change? Or revert, back to kind of the symptoms of ADHD?
It would be different for everyone because obviously everyone's in a different situation. I've been on it for 5 years. But from what I've understood from pharmacists is that the effects are quite instantaneous because it lasts in your system for 24 hours. So for me personally, when I've taken breaks from it, I've seen a real increase in symptoms again, and that's been really, really challenging, especially if you know yourself in one way on the medication and then suddenly you're off it the next day.
Let's find out why there is a shortage. Thoran, what's the explanation for this?
Well, we're being given the explanation that it's a combination of manufacturing issues and an increase in global demand. We're also hearing that more and more people are being diagnosed. But ultimately, and I don't really like that last premise because it negates the fact that we're actually looking after people's health much better. I think it's very frustrating, as we've heard there. I've also heard of people thinking about quitting their jobs, for example, because they're really finding work a struggle. And it's awful for children and young adults who are having to go through their exams. It's not just the stress of dealing with their own condition and managing that and having a long-term health condition. It is an impact on people's lives, but also they've got exams, and I remember, exams are a very stressful time for young people, and to have that as an added burden is awful. And I cannot, think there needs to be more done by the government specifically for those young adults affected.
Just a thought on that. We've got a statement from the Department of Health and Social Care saying we've taken swift action to improve the supply. As a result, some issues have been resolved. We're urging anyone who's worried to speak to their clinician, and that could be you. Are you seeing evidence, as the government says, of some issues being resolved?
Well, the supply is intermittent, but that's no help to patients who need their supply, as we've heard there, and some are having to ration their medication. We know that pharmacists are spending hours dealing with shortages, and it is not just ADHD medication. And then, yes, there is the additional challenge with some of these ADHD medications because they are controlled medications. And so the prescription is only valid for 28 days, which might mean I'm able to get hold of it on that 30th day, the remainder of the prescription. So I've been able to give you half your prescription, but I cannot then provide it after the 30th day, and we have to return back to the doctor or prescriber for a fresh prescription. There are mechanisms that I think the government needs to look into to make it easier in cases where there are medication shortages. But at the moment, this system is not working. This has been going on, as we've heard there, since autumn last year. What is the government doing about it? Because certainly on the front line, all we are dealing with is having to explain this to patients and being very sympathetic, but we are struggling because we don't get a lot of information that I think we'd like to be providing to our patients.
Leanne, have you spoken to your GP about concerns about getting hold of the medication? What did they say?
I have to wait 7 years to get my medication.
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
I have to wait 7 years for my medication dosage to be adjusted. So they put me on a waiting list for 7 years because, as we just heard there, it's a really highly controlled drug, so it can only be prescribed by a psychiatrist. And my GP's waiting list is 7 years long to actually see that psychiatrist. So that's the situation I'm in personally. And I think everyone else is in a similar situation.
Can I just ask, when this medication is crucial to your everyday life, to you functioning well in everyday life, so when you heard that, how did you react?
Well, I first had that when I joined the GP, so that was 4 years ago, and they said, OK, we can continue prescribing you this medication, which previously I'd had to pay £300 a month for from a private psychiatrist. And it had made me really, really unwell because I obviously couldn't afford that. And when they told me that, I just could not believe it because I'd become so unwell from rationing it and taking it on certain days because of the expense then, that I basically ended up writing a book to try and help other people because I was like, it's so terrible that people would go through all of this, especially if they've paid to go privately and then to go to the NHS, because if I hadn't had that private prescription, I would have had to wait 7 years to even go on the medication in the first place, even after a diagnosis.
I don't know, what, as we heard from Thorin a moment ago, the government is saying they're having some success, but clearly, practically, over the counter, as Thorin was saying, and you're hearing this story, it's not working. This is not working.
No, I actually led a petition last year about this, calling for the government to do a review into the support before and after an ADHD diagnosis because of this medication shortages. And it got 11,000 signatures, and the government replied and said, it's not our problem. The NICE guidelines say that there are no minimum waiting times for NHS assessments or medication. So they essentially said, it's not our problem. We recognise that there's long waits. They've had a debate, but they're not actually doing much about it. They've created a task force right now, but there's not any information about this. And crucially, there's no practical information for individuals that have to wait every month and they have no idea if they'll be able to get their medication or where from.
It's a very difficult situation for you to be in. Thank you, Leanne. Leanne